The kid goat was at my feet, opened up at the neck, and the thing that had done it was 20 feet behind me with the brush at its back and the spotlight in its eyes, and it wasn't running. I'd been the one with the rifle, and I'd left the rifle in the blind. I had walked out into the cleared yard like a man going to check his mail. By the time I figured out what I'd done, the thing was looking at me across the dead goat with both of us in the same patch of light, and the brush was between it and me, and there was nothing else between us at all. That was the moment I understood what I was actually dealing with, and that was the mistake. Whatever rules a man has about how to behave in his own pasture when a predator is on his stock, I broke them all in about 3 seconds, and I am very lucky to be sitting here telling you this. Before we jump in, drop your location in the comments and let us know where you're watching from. And if you haven't already, smash that subscribe button. My name is Hector. I'll leave the last name out. People in Brooks County will know who I am from the rest of it anyway, but for the search engines in the comment section, just Hector. I'm 53. I've worked the same 640 acres south of Falfurrias since my dad passed in 2003. The land's been in my family since my great-grandfather got it after the first big war, the one with the trenches. We ran a small herd of cattle, mostly crossbred Brahman Hereford, maybe 40 head at any given time, and my mom kept goats. Spanish Boer crosses, 12 of them in the summer of 2018, which is the summer this happened. We'd butcher one for cabrito at Easter, and the rest of the year they just kept the brush down around the house and the chicken coop. My mom loved those goats. She named all of them. There was one called Frijol because she was solid black, and one called Galleta because of a pale ring around her neck, and a brown nanny named Peppa that Mom had raised on a bottle. I'm telling you that because it matters later. Before we go any further, I want to set the baseline. I don't drink. I haven't had a beer since 1998. I sleep solid most nights, 7 hours, and I get up at 5, and the only medication I take is for blood pressure, which is high because I'm a 53-year-old Mexican-American who eats too much salt. I am not a guy who sees things. I have spent more nights outside than inside in my adult life, and I know what's out there. I have shot coyotes. I have run off a mountain lion. I have caught a bobcat in a cage trap and let it go. I have driven a Bronco at 3 in the morning down a sendero with a spotlight strapped to the roll bar looking for hogs in the rye. I know what those animals look like. I know what they smell like. I know what their tracks look like in the sand the morning after. I am telling you this so you understand my normal. Because what came on the land in August of 2018 was so far outside of normal that I haven't slept right since. And I check the brush from the porch every night before I go inside. And I bought a heavy interior door for the back of the house in 2019 and put a deadbolt on it even though we are 17 miles from the nearest town. I am not a rancher in the way the magazines use the word. I am a guy who works a small piece of family land and supplements with day work for the bigger outfits when they need a hand at branding or shipping. I've worked the King Ranch Norias division a few times on contract crews. I've worked the Kennedy spread to the east. I've helped neighbors gather in the brush. The brush. That's what we call this country down here. Brasada. Mesquite and Huzash and Blackbrush and Granjano and Amargosa, all woven together so tight that in some spots you have to crawl on your belly to get through. Prickly pear taller than a man. Sandy soil that holds tracks the way wet cement does for about 12 hours before the wind smooths it over. If you've spent time in country like this, you know what I mean. If you haven't, picture a parking lot of thorn bushes that wants to eat your shirt off your back, and then picture that parking lot going on for 60 miles in every direction. That's south of Falfurrias. The closest town worth mentioning is Falfurrias itself. About 5,000 people, half empty downtown. A chibil of gas stations, the Pickwick on 281, the Diana's Tortilla Place, the Heritage Museum, Sacred Heart Catholic Church, the Don Pedrito Jaramillo Shrine on Heritage Road, where people still leave candles and notes for El Santo, the Curandero, who's been dead since 1907. South of town is the Border Patrol checkpoint on 281 that everybody driving up from the valley has to pass through. Past that, FM 2000, 191 cuts east toward Encino. FM 1000, 418 goes west. And in between those, in a wedge of brush country that's got maybe a dozen ranch headquarters and no real towns, is where I live. Closest neighbor to the south is Ramiro Cavazos. Closest to the north is a hunting lease that nobody lives on, just a cook's camp and a couple of trailers that the outfitter uses in deer season. It had been a hot summer. I want to put that down because it's part of why I think it came in the first place. The drought had been on us since April. The grass was about gone by July. The cattle were eating prickly pear pads I'd burned the spines off with a propane torch, which is what you do down here when it gets bad. The tanks were low. The well was pulling brackish water. The heat was the kind that gets into the metal of your truck and stays there past midnight. You couldn't touch your steering wheel until 9 in the morning without leather gloves. 3 of my neighbors had culled deep, 2 of them down to nothing, and Ramiro had told me at the co-op in July that he hadn't seen a coyote on his place in 2 weeks, which was strange because Ramiro saw coyotes every day, and which I now think was the first thing I should have paid attention to. The regular predators had moved off. Something else was using the country. It was a Tuesday morning, the 7th of August, when I found the first goat. I was checking the perimeter fence on the south side, which butts up against Ramiro's pasture. Long fence line. I was on the four-wheeler. The sun wasn't fully up. I came around the south corner of the pasture where it meets the brushy bottom that runs toward the dry creek, and the first thing I saw was buzzards. A lot of buzzards. 20. 25. All walking around something on the ground, hopping at each other for position. I figured a calf had gotten into the brush and died. It happens. Heat, dehydration, snakebite. Sometimes they just lay down and don't get up. I drove the four-wheeler up and the buzzards lifted off in that slow, irritated way they do, like I was the one being rude. What was on the ground wasn't a calf. It was Frijol, the black nanny. About a quarter mile from the house, well outside the goat pen. That was the first thing wrong. The goats didn't get out. The pen was hog wire, 6 foot, with the bottom buried, because Mom didn't trust coyotes. If a goat was a quarter mile from the pen, somebody had let her out, or something had taken her through the fence. There wasn't a hole in the fence that I'd seen on my last walk. The second thing wrong was the way she'd been killed. The buzzards hadn't been at her long. The eyes were gone and there was some work on the belly. But the killing wound was clean and obvious because there was no blood pool. 2 punctures, side of the neck, each about the diameter of a pencil, spaced about 1.5 inches apart. That was it. No torn flesh, no chewing, no dragging. The goat hadn't been eaten. She'd been drained, and then she'd been left. I stood there for a long time with my hand on the four-wheeler seat. I tried to make it make sense. Coyote? A coyote tears up a kill, eats the soft parts first, leaves the bones. Bobcat? A bobcat would have eaten the belly out and dragged her under brush to cache. Mountain lion? We have them, but they're rare, and they eat what they kill or hide it. A dog pack? Same as coyotes. Worse, usually, because dogs play with what they kill. 2 punctures. Drained. I knew the word that wanted to come into my head, and I wouldn't let it come, because that word belongs to bullshit TV and to drunks in the back of the Pickwick telling stories that come back around every Halloween. I am a grown man from Brooks County, and I do not use that word about my own land. I picked her up, what was left of her, and brought her home in the front basket of the four-wheeler. My mom cried. She was a tough lady, born in 1944, picked cotton as a girl, raised 3 kids alone after my dad's first heart attack in '89 and his second in '03, and she didn't cry it much. But she cried over Frijol, because Frijol had been one of the first goats we got after Dad died, and she'd had her 15 years. Goats don't usually live that long. Frijol had been her project. I told her it must have been a coyote. She knew it wasn't. She'd kept goats her whole life. She knew what a coyote did to a goat, but she let me say it because that's what mothers do for sons who are obviously lying to comfort them. She just said, "Okay, mijo." Okay. That night I sat up on the porch with the 22 to 250 across my knees and a cup of black coffee that was mostly there to keep me upright. The dogs were inside. Mom had 2 of them, both old, a blue heeler named Cappy and a mutt named Pepito. Cappy had been a working dog for me on the ranch 10 years back, but she was about useless now, deaf in one ear and stiff in the hips. Pepito was just a couch dog. Mom had brought them inside because she said they were upset. Looking back, I should have asked her what she meant. Mom always knew before anyone else when something wasn't right. She'd been raised by women who knew how to read a place. Around 2 a.m., one of the remaining goats screamed. If you've never heard a goat scream, you don't know what I'm talking about. They sound like a child. They sound like a human child being hurt, and there's something in your DNA that hits the alarm button before your eyes can find them. I was off the porch and running for the pen before I made any decision. I had the rifle up. I had the spotlight in my offhand, one of those cheap handhelds that you used to be able to plug into a cigarette lighter that I'd hardwired to a small battery pack on my belt. I hit the pen with the light. Goats were milling around at the back fence, packed so tight against the wire that 2 of them were getting crushed. The screamer was a young nanny, white with brown spots, named Cafe. She was on the ground. There was something on top of her. I won't claim I got a great look at this first time. I didn't. The spotlight beam hit it, and it moved. Fast. Faster than I thought a thing that size should move. And it was off Cafe and out of the pen and into the brush before I could even get the rifle to my shoulder. What I had was an impression. That's the right word. An impression. The way a stamp leaves a mark on paper. Gray. Hairless or almost hairless. With patches of something on the spine that might have been hair or might have been quills. I couldn't tell. Crouched low. Maybe the size of a big dog, 50, 60 pounds, long limbs, a head that was wrong, and it had been at her neck. It went over the back fence of the pen and didn't go through it. The pen fence was 6 feet. The thing cleared it without making a sound that I heard over my own breathing. Cafe lived. Her neck was bleeding from 2 punctures, the same as Frijole's, but the artery hadn't been opened. She was weak from blood loss for a few days, and then she came back. The other goats were okay. 3 of them had bruises from being mashed against the fence. I sat in the pen with Cafe until sunrise and didn't see anything else. The sun came up gray and hot. I walked the perimeter of the pen, looking for tracks, and what I found, in the soft sand outside the back fence where it had landed after the jump, was a single clear print. 4 toes, pads, a claw at the end of each toe that punched into the sand deeper than a dog's claw would. The print was about 4 inches long. Not big, a medium dog. But the spacing of the toes was wrong. They were too long and they spread too wide, and the rear of the foot wasn't right. It wasn't a clean pad like a canine. It was bigger, and the heel sat deeper, like the thing put weight on it the way a person does. I took a picture. I still have it. It's not a great picture. Phones in 2018 didn't do great in low light. You can see that something is a track. You can argue about what kind. I'm going to be honest with you for a second. At this point in the story, the morning after Cafe, I was already lying to myself. I knew what people in this part of the country had been saying for years. The Chupacabra story had been running hot in South Texas since about 2004. Phyllis Canyon up in Cuero had her ranch hit and got a carcass that ended up on the news. Hairless gray animals had been shot near Cuero, near DeWitt County, near Pollock in East Texas, near the Big Thicket. The mainstream answer was always the same: mangy coyote, or coyote dog hybrid with sarcoptic mange. Hair falls out, skin turns gray and thick. Animal looks alien, gets weak from blood loss because the mange makes them bleed and the secondary infection makes them slow, and they attack livestock because they can't catch a rabbit anymore. That's the answer that gets you a real biologist's signature and a quote in the Caller Times. I'd read all of that. I'd grown up with the answer. I'd even seen a mangy coyote once on my own land. Back in 2011, we shot it. It was pitiful. Half the size of a healthy coyote, skin like cracked leather, weeping sores, ribs you could count from 40 feet. Nothing about it could have jumped a 6-foot fence and run faster than my eyes could track. I didn't tell my mom what I'd seen in the pen because I knew what she'd say. She'd say the word I wasn't ready for. So I told her it was a wild dog and I'd be sleeping on the porch until I got it. I called Ramiro the next afternoon. Ramiro Cavazos. South neighbor. He's about 10 years older than me. A real cattleman. Runs his place like a business. We've helped each other gather for 20 years. I asked him if he'd lost anything in the last week. He went quiet. He said, "Hector, come over here. Bring whatever you've got on it." Ramiro's headquarters is a single-story stucco house about 3 miles south of mine on a county road, mesquite shade in the yard. A tin shop building behind the house with a tractor in it and a deer cooler that he uses during hunting season, because his oldest son is an outfitter who takes high-fence whitetail clients in the fall. Ramiro was sitting on the back porch in shorts and a cattleman's hat, drinking a Topo Chico. I sat down. He didn't say anything for a minute. He let me drink half my own Topo Chico before he started. "How many you lost?" he said. "1 down, 1 hurt." "How were they killed?" "2 punctures. Neck. No blood." He nodded. He didn't look surprised. He looked like a man who had been waiting for somebody to say it out loud. "I've lost 6, he said. "Started in early August. All goats and 1 calf. The calf was a younger one, weaned but small. Same thing. Punctures, no eating." "You tell anybody?" I told the game warden. He laughed without it being funny. He told me to set out coyote traps. I told him no coyote was doing this. He said feral hogs sometimes attack livestock. I told him to come look at the kills. He said he'd put me on the list. We sat there. Ramiro lit a cigarette. He smoked Pall Malls because his dad had smoked Pall Malls. He said, "I've seen it." That stopped me. "Where?" 2 nights ago. East pasture. I was running the spotlight on a coyote I thought was hanging around the back pens. Picked up something at the edge of the brush. Gray. About like a coyote, but the back is high, higher than the shoulders. Like a hyena from a TV show, the head is too small. The eyes catch the light orange, not green like a coyote. Orange, and it didn't run from the light. It looked at me. I shot at it. I missed. It walked off into the brush. Walked. Didn't run. He took a long drag. He stared at his shop. "I don't know what it is," he said. "I'm not going to say what it is. I don't believe in that stuff. My grandmother believed in that stuff. I am a Catholic and a businessman, and I don't believe in that stuff." He looked at me. "But I'm going to tell you the truth, Hector. I am scared. I haven't been scared on my own place since I was a kid, and I am scared." I told Ramiro about the track. I showed him the picture. He shook his head and said, "Yeah, that's what I saw a piece of in the dust by my goat pen. Couldn't make it out clean." I tried. We agreed to coordinate. We'd both sit up at night on our respective places for a while. We'd call each other if either of us got eyes on the thing. He said he was going to put trail cameras out, the kind he used in deer season, and he'd let me know what came up on them. Driving home, I took the long way. I went out to the east, past the windmill that doesn't pump anymore, down a sendero that gets used for hunting in the fall. The brush was at its worst that summer. The drought had thinned it in some places and made the rest of it sharper. I stopped the truck at the gate to the east pasture and got out. I don't know why. I think I wanted to look at the country and remind myself it was the same country I'd known my whole life. It wasn't. I want to be straight about this. The country had changed somehow, and I don't have a clean explanation for it. The brush looked the same. The mesquite was the same green-gray. The prickly pear was the same wilted color it gets in August. The sky was the same blue with the same buzzards working in the same circles. But there was a quality to it, a feeling that hadn't been there before, and I noticed it standing at that gate. The way you notice a smell that's faintly off in your house when you come home from a trip. Something has moved. Something is wrong. You can't say what. Birds. I think it was the birds. There weren't any. Caracaras, mockingbirds, doves, scissortails, all the regular birds. You don't notice them when they're there because they're always there. They weren't there. The brush was quiet. I stood at the gate for maybe a minute and a half listening, and I heard cicadas in the distance and a truck on 281 somewhere far away, and that was it. Nothing close. I got back in the truck and drove home. I made myself say something out loud to the windshield. There is a predator on my land that I don't understand. I will deal with it the way my dad would have dealt with it. I will sit up at night. I will watch. I will shoot it when it comes back. I will not give it a name. That was the agreement I made with myself. I broke it inside 2 weeks. The next 10 days are a blur in my memory. I know I worked. I got cows out of the brush twice and fixed a section of fence on the north side. I went to town for groceries on a Tuesday. I called my sister in San Antonio because Mom asked me to, and I didn't tell her about the goat. But the nights were the long part. The nights got long. I sat on the porch with the 22 to 250 most nights, from about 10 to about 3. I rigged up a couple of motion lights with help from a guy in Fremont who did electrical work. I put them on the corners of the goat pen and on the back wall of the house. They came on if anything bigger than a possum walked under them. I kept a thermos of coffee and a chair and a blanket because some nights got down to 70, and that feels cold when you've been still. For the first 6 nights, nothing. The motion lights came on a few times. Once for a possum, once for a skunk, once for a feral cat that lives behind the well house and that Mom feeds even though I tell her not to. I'd raise the rifle when the lights came on, and then I'd see what it was and put the rifle down and drink more coffee. On the 7th night, the lights came on at the back of the house and the goats started screaming. I was around the corner of the house in maybe 15 seconds, rifle up. The lights had caught nothing. The pen was on the other side of the house. By the time I got there, the screaming had stopped, and the goats were piled at the back fence like they'd been the first time. I went into the pen. I counted. 12. All accounted for, all standing, none hurt. But one of them, Galetta, had blood at the base of her throat. Not deep, a scratch, maybe. She let me look at it. 2 small breaks in the skin, an inch apart. Not deep enough to kill. Like something had started and been interrupted by the lights and the noise and let go. I walked the perimeter of the pen. The back motion light was on the gate side, facing the brush. I followed the line of the light out into the cleared yard. There were fresh tracks in the sand at the edge of the cleared area where the lights cut off and the brush started. Same kind of track. 4 toes, long, claws. The thing had been backing away when the light came on. It had been right at the fence. It had been an inch from getting Galletta out. It had heard me coming. I'd come out around the wrong corner because the motion light had drawn me, and it had heard me and let go and disappeared into the brush in the seconds between my getting around the building and my getting to the pen. For the 8th and 9th nights, nothing happened. The motion lights stayed off. I sat on the porch and watched and drank coffee and lost weight because I wasn't sleeping right. Mom told me to come inside and rest, and I said I would, and I didn't. On the 10th night, around midnight, I heard it. Not the goats. Not a snort or a hiss or any of the noises an animal makes that you can put a name to. It was something between a high-pitched whine and a click. A single short sound that came from the brush north of the house. Then a pause of maybe 10 seconds. Then another one from the brush east of the house. Then a pause. Then a third one from south of the goat pen. 3 sounds from 3 positions. Not one animal moving. 3 positions at once. Or one animal moving fast enough that it didn't seem possible. I sat very still on the porch. The hair on the back of my neck was up, and I'm putting that down because it actually happened, not because it's a thing people say. The skin on my arms was prickling. I felt watched. Specifically, from one direction, from the brush to the right of the porch, from a spot maybe 40 feet out where a clump of huzosh makes a darker pocket inside the dark. I lifted the spotlight. I didn't turn it on. I turned my head slowly, like I was just looking around, and then I snapped the spotlight on toward that pocket of huzosh. There were eyes, 2 of them, orange. Not green, not yellow, not the white-blue of a dog or the gold-amber of a deer. Orange, the color of a sodium vapor streetlight, set close together, about 3 feet off the ground, looking right at me. The eyes didn't blink. They didn't move. The body behind them didn't move. The thing was crouched and watching me, and the spotlight didn't make it run. I raised the rifle. The eyes moved. Not the way a deer's eyes move when it spooks. A quick jerk and then the bounce of the body away. The eyes moved sideways, smooth, like they were on a track, and then they were gone. The huzosh hadn't moved. I hadn't heard it leave. It had just shifted, and the eyes were no longer there, and the brush around it was untouched. I sat with the rifle up for maybe 10 minutes. The motion lights didn't come on. The goats didn't scream. The clicking didn't come back. I put the rifle down and I let my arms shake. That was the first time I knew it was hunting me back. Up to that point, I'd been the one watching, and I'd been telling myself I was the predator with the long-range rifle in the high ground of the porch, and the thing in the brush was the prey, because that's how it has to be when you have a rifle, and the other thing has teeth. After that night, I didn't believe it anymore. After that night, I understood that the thing was watching me as long as I was watching it, and it was learning what I did, and it was deciding when to come in. Mom found me on the porch around 5 in the morning. She had her robe on and a cup of coffee in her hand. She'd been up since 4 because she was an old woman who couldn't sleep. She sat down next to me in the other chair. She didn't say anything for a while. Then she said, "Mijo, what is on the land?" I told her. I told her everything. The kill of Frijol, the interrupted kill of Gaeta, the tracks, the smell, Ramiro, the eyes in the brush. I didn't use the word. I said the animal. She listened. She held the coffee cup with both her hands the way she always did when something was on her mind, the way her own mother had held a coffee cup, the way her grandmother had probably held a coffee cup. The women in my family had all held coffee cups like that for 100 years on this same porch. When I was done, she said, "I know what it is." I didn't say anything. She said, "My grandmother used to talk about a thing in the brush, before the cars, before the roads were paved. She came up from Mexico in 1910, walking. She was a little girl, and she said her father told her about an animal that takes the blood out of goats. He had a word for it that wasn't a word in Spanish. It was an older word. I don't remember the word, mijo. I'm sorry. I was 12 when she told me, and I didn't listen the way I should have. I asked her, did they kill it? Did somebody kill it back then? She thought about it. She said, I don't know. I think they moved away. The family, my grandmother's family. They moved away from the rancho they were on and went to Encinal. I think the animal made them leave. I think it didn't go away. They did. I want you to understand something. My mother was not a superstitious woman. She went to Mass, and she crossed herself when an ambulance went by, but she didn't believe in QQE stories. She read the paper. She watched the news. She had taught second grade for 36 years in Falfurrias, and she had a master's degree from Texas A&I before they renamed it. When she said she knew what it was, she wasn't saying it out of folklore. She was saying it because she had connected what I'd told her to something her grandmother had said 60 years before, and she'd believed her grandmother, and she believed me. That's all. She put her hand on my arm. She said, Hector, listen to me. You are not going to sit out here every night with that rifle. You are going to put the goats inside. We have the old chicken coop with the cement floor and the metal roof. You'll lock them in there at night. The animal will go away when it can't get them. It'll go to Ramiro, or it'll go past Ramiro to somebody else, but it'll leave us alone. I told her, Mom, we can't push it off on the neighbors. She said, Mijo, we can. We have to. You think Ramiro wouldn't push it on us if he could? It's just an animal. It eats where it can eat. If it can't eat here, it goes. She might have been right. I want to put that down in writing in case it matters to anybody reading this. She might have been right. If I had locked the goats up that night the way she told me to, this story would end here, and I'd be a guy who'd had some weird stuff happen on his place and didn't have a clean explanation. I'd be sitting on the porch this evening instead of sitting at this kitchen table writing it out. I didn't do what she said. Part of me wanted to kill it. Part of me thought that if I could put the thing down with the rifle, I could end it, and Ramiro could end it, and the country could go back to being the country. The other part of me, the part I'm less proud of, wanted to see it. I had seen the eyes. I had seen the impression in the pen. I hadn't seen the thing. I wanted to know what it was. I wanted to put a name to it that wasn't the name. I wanted to be the one who got it on a camera and gave it to a biologist at Texas A&M Kingsville and let them figure out it was just a coyote with mange and bad luck. I wanted to fix the problem with the rifle, and I wanted to fix the bigger problem, the problem of what was sitting in the brush at night, with knowledge. So I lied to my mother. I told her I'd lock up the goats. And then I went into town that afternoon and made 2 stops before I drove up to Alice. The first stop was the Falfurrias Farm and Ranch Supply on Rice Street, where I needed a roll of hog wire I'd been putting off. I didn't need to talk to anybody. I just needed wire. But there's an old viejito who sits on the front porch of the co-op most afternoons in a folding chair he brings himself, with a coffee from the gas station next door. His name is Don Memo Garza, and he is 80-something, and he was a ranch foreman for the King back when the King was twice the size it is now, and he is the kind of old man you stop and say hello to whether you have time or not. I said hello. He nodded. He looked at me the way old men look at you when they can read your face better than you can. He said, in Spanish, "What's wrong with you?" I told him nothing. He laughed without much humor and said, in English, "Hector, your eyes look like a man who hasn't slept in a week." He didn't ask me anything else. He sat there. I sat down on the bench next to him. I wasn't going to tell him. I didn't tell him, but what I said was, "Don Memo, have you ever lost stock to something that wasn't a coyote and wasn't a cat?" He sat with that for a long time. He looked out at Rice Street, at the heat coming off the asphalt, at a stray dog that was crossing the road in no particular hurry. Then he said, one time, in 1968, I was working for the Uturia when it was still the Uturia. Lost a yearling to 2 holes in the neck and no blood. I was 26 years old. The foreman who showed me the carcass was named Eulogio Mendoza, and he was 60 then, and he had seen it before, in 1932, on a place down by Lynn. He told me what to do. He said, move the cattle to the headquarters trap, lock the dogs up, burn pin-on needles at the gates for 3 nights. We did all of that. We didn't lose any more. About 6 weeks later, a rancher near Hebronville lost a heifer the same way. About 2 months after that, somebody in Duval County. It moved. We never saw it. We just lost the one. He took a sip of his coffee. He didn't look at me. He said, if you lose 2, you have a problem. If you lose 3, the problem is not going to be solved by you with a rifle. Do what Eulogio told me. Bring the goats in. Lock the dogs up. Burn what your grandmother told you to burn. Don't sit out there with a gun, Hector. Don't sit out there with a gun. I told him I'd think about it. He laughed without much humor again. He said, no, you won't. You're the same as I was at your age. You'll go sit out there with a gun. Just be careful where you sit, mijo. Don't put yourself between it and what it wants. Whatever it is, it does not like that. Eulogio told me that. He had a brother who died in the brush near Rialitos in 1944, and the family said the brother had got between it and a calf. That's what they said. Just stay out of the way. If you have to shoot at it, shoot from a distance, and don't move toward it after. Don't ever move toward it. I drove up 281 to Alice in the Tractor Supply, and I bought 4 more trail cameras and a better spotlight, a 1,000,000 candle power handheld that could light up the brush for 100 yards. I bought new batteries. I bought a box of Federal soft points for the 22 to 250, even though I had half a box already. I was preparing for war, and I was preparing it like a man who has watched too many movies. I didn't tell my mom I'd talked to Don Memo. I didn't tell my mom anything. Ramiro called me that Thursday and said he had a photograph. I drove over. He pulled it up on his phone. The trail camera had triggered at 11:14 p.m. on a Wednesday and caught it walking across a sendero between the camera and a feeder he keeps baited for whitetail. I'm going to describe the photograph because I'm not going to lie about what it showed. It was about 30 feet from the camera. The flash hit it dead center. It was upright, standing on its hind legs. Not a hop, not a bear-up posture, but standing, with its forelimbs hanging at its sides the way arms hang when you're walking. The hind legs were strange. They didn't bend the way a person's legs bend. There was a backward joint about halfway down. Digitigrade, like a dog's legs if a dog stood up on them. The torso was thin. The skin was gray, blotched with darker patches across the belly and chest. There was a ridge of something on its spine that I couldn't tell was hair or quills. The neck was long. The head was small in proportion to the body, with a long jaw and teeth visible even at 30 feet because the lips were drawn back. The eyes were closed in the photo. The flash had caught it at the wrong instant, and the eyes were just slits. It was about 4 feet tall, standing up. I looked at the photo for a long time. Ramiro didn't say anything. Then he said, I told my wife I was going to send it to the news. She told me if I sent it to the news, she was going to leave me. She doesn't want people knowing this. She's worried about the kids and the grandkids. I asked, are you going to send it? He said, no, I'm going to delete it. He didn't delete it. He still has the photo. I saw it again 3 years later when his oldest son was visiting and showed it to me on a phone. It was the same photo. Ramiro had kept it, but he didn't send it to anybody. I drove home from Ramiro's with the photo in my head, and I planned for that Friday. I went to bed early on Thursday and slept 3 hours on muscle relaxants my mom had from a back injury, and I got up at midnight and started getting ready. The plan was this. I would set up at the east edge of the goat pen, in a brush blind I'd built that morning out of cedar posts and burlap, so the wind would be in my face if it came from the east, which it was forecast to. I would have the rifle on a bipod. I'd have the spotlight wired to a foot switch so I could light up the pen in the area east of it without moving my hands off the rifle. I'd have a chair. I'd have my phone on silent in my pocket. I'd have a knife on my belt. I'd have a flashlight in my back pocket as a backup. I'd sit there from 1 in the morning until 5, and if the thing came in, I'd kill it. That was the plan. The wind on Friday was out of the southeast, the way the forecast had said. I was in the blind by 12:45 a.m. The temperature had dropped to about 78, and there was a little dampness in the air for the first time in months, because a tropical system was sitting in the Gulf and pushing some humidity inland. The brush had a different smell to it that night. The mesquite was throwing off more of its sap smell than usual, like a wet eucalyptus, sweet under the dust. I noticed it because I was paying attention to everything. I'd told myself before I sat down that I was going to use every sense I had, as long as I could. The goats were in the pen. I had not locked them in the chicken coop the way Mom had said. I'd use them as bait. I am putting that down because it is the truth, and I'm not going to dress it up. I used my own mother's goats to draw the animal in so I could shoot it. If I am going to tell this story right, I have to tell that part of it. The first hour was nothing. The cicadas had gone quiet by 1 and a single screech owl was calling from the windbreak west of the house. I knew that owl. It had been there for 2 years. It called every night from about 10 to about 2. It was a friend of mine in the way the regular animals on a place become friends of yours, the ones whose voices you can pick out of the dark without thinking about it. At 2:10 the owl stopped. The owl stopped and didn't start again. That was the first sign. The second sign was a smell on the wind. The wind shifted slightly, more from the east than the southeast, and it brought a smell into the blind. Sharper than I'd smelled before. Closer. Ammonia, the way a cat's box smells if you haven't cleaned it for 2 weeks, with a sweet rotting smell under it, the way roadkill gets sweet after it's been in the sun for a couple of days. It was on the moving air, and it was strong enough that I could taste it at the back of my mouth, the way you can taste a fire when you're downwind of one before you can see the smoke. I checked the safety on the rifle. I put my foot on the foot switch but didn't push it. The third sign was the goats. They didn't scream. They didn't run to the back fence. They moved. They did a single coordinated motion, all 12 of them, away from the east fence toward the west fence, like a flock of starlings turning in the air. And then they stood very still, all of them facing east, all of them not moving. They didn't make a sound. The thing was at the east fence. I want to slow this part down because the way I remember it now, 20 seconds took about 10 minutes. The blind I was in was about 15 feet northeast of the pen. The east fence of the pen was about 10 feet from the blind. The brush started about 30 feet beyond the east fence. The cleared area between the brush and the fence was packed sand, with some patches of dead bahia grass and a single low huzache that I had been meaning to grub out for a year and hadn't gotten around to. I lifted the rifle. Slowly. I'd practiced lifting it slowly in case this happened. I got the stock to my shoulder, my cheek to the cheek piece, my eye to the scope. I had the scope on 3 power. I'd done that on purpose, because at 3 power I had a wide field of view at close range. I put my foot on the switch. I pushed it. The spotlight came on and lit up the east fence and the cleared yard beyond it. The animal was inside the pen, not at the fence. Inside. I want to be careful here. The thing was in the pen. The pen fence was 6 feet of hog wire with the bottom buried. The gate was on the south side and was latched and chained because I'd latched and chained it myself when I put the goats in that afternoon. The animal had not come over the gate, which was the lowest point at 5 feet. It had come over the fence, or it had come up out of the ground, or it had walked through the wire. I don't know. I'm telling you what I saw. The thing was inside the pen, and the goats were on the far side of it, and there was a goat at the thing's feet, on its side, with its neck open. One of the goats had broken away from the flock, and the thing had taken it down in the moment between the wind shift and the goats freezing. I had not heard it happen. I had not heard the goat hit the ground. The thing was hunched over the kill. The spotlight was on it. It lifted its head and looked at me. I had it in the scope. I had a clean shot. The chest was the size of a softball. The head was the size of a grapefruit, both well inside the dot of my reticle. I had 100-yard zero on a 30-foot shot. I could have ended it. I want to tell you why I didn't. I have thought about it for years. The face was wrong. I'm going to describe it as best I can. The head was long, the way Ramiro's photograph had shown, with a jaw that was narrow and pointed. The teeth in the front were long. The canines on the top jaw came down past the bottom lip even when the mouth was closed. The skin on the face was the same gray as the body, blotched with darker spots around the muzzle, with thinner skin around the eyes so I could see veins moving in the skin. The eyes were big. They were set forward like a predator's eyes, both facing me, and they were not the slits the camera flash had caught. They were open. They were orange in the spotlight. The pupils were vertical, like a cat's, but the vertical wasn't a clean slit. It was an irregular line, the way a crack in a wall is a line. The pupils dilated in the spotlight, and dilated again, wider than I thought any animal pupil could go. The orange was full of light. The eyes had me. I looked into those eyes through the scope, and the animal looked back into the scope at me. And what passed between us, what I felt, was not the look of a coyote, or a dog, or a bobcat, or anything else with an animal mind. The look had thinking behind it. Not the thinking of a smart border collie figuring out a gate. Not the thinking of a chimp at a zoo solving a puzzle. The thinking of a thing that was assessing me, that knew I was a person, that knew the rifle in my hands could end it, and that had decided to look at me anyway because it wanted me to know that it knew. I couldn't pull the trigger. I tried. My finger was on the trigger. The safety was off. The shot was clean. My finger was on the trigger, and the trigger wouldn't go. The animal lowered its head and bit the goat again. Not feeding. The kill was already done. It was making a point. It put its mouth on the goat's neck and tore a piece of meat away. Then it dropped the meat on the ground next to the body. Then it picked the goat up by the back of the neck the way a dog carries a duck, and it carried the goat to the east fence. The goat was almost as big as the thing carrying it. It carried the goat like the goat weighed nothing. It got to the east fence, and it went over the fence without breaking stride, and it set the goat down in the cleared yard, about 10 feet beyond the fence, in the middle of the spotlight beam. It stood up. It looked at me again. It put one hand on the goat. I'm calling it a hand because it had digits, 4 of them, and the digits were long and clawed, and the longest digit was on the outside, like a thumb but on the wrong side. The hand was on the goat's flank, possessively, the way you'd put your hand on a piece of meat at a butcher counter to say, "This one is mine." Then it turned around, deliberate, slow, and it walked into the brush behind it. The brush closed. The spotlight beam ran past it into nothing. The sound of its walking faded. The goats in the pen behind me didn't move. The goat was in the cleared yard. The thing was in the brush. I was in the blind. That was the arrangement. I sat in the blind for I don't know how long. 2 minutes. 5. The spotlight was still on. The goat in the cleared yard was lit up like a stage prop. My finger was off the trigger now. I could move my hands again. I tried to think. I tried to figure out what the right thing to do was. I want to tell you what I was thinking, as best I can reconstruct it, because the mistake I made next has to make some kind of sense, or this story doesn't work. I was thinking that the thing was gone. I had watched it go into the brush. I had not heard it come back. I was thinking that I needed to get the goat. Mom would want to bury Peppa. Peppa was the bottle-raised one. Mom had loved her. Mom would not want her dragged off and finished by buzzards in the morning sun. I was thinking that if I left the blind, I should bring the rifle. But I was also thinking that I needed 2 hands to carry the goat, and the rifle wasn't going to do anything for me because I had already proven it wouldn't. I had the thing in the scope at 30 feet and I had not pulled the trigger. I had tried and I had not pulled. The rifle was already useless. I knew the rifle was useless, so I left the rifle in the blind. That is the moment. That is the choice. I have replayed it 10,000 times. I left the rifle in the blind on a bipod on a folding chair, and I climbed out of the burlap into the cleared yard, and I walked toward Peppa in the middle of the spotlight beam. I got to her. I bent down to pick her up. She was still warm. Her eyes were open. The neck was a wreck. 2 big punctures and 1 tear from where the thing had taken a piece. She weighed about 45 pounds. I got my arms under her. I heard the breath. It was behind me. The brush behind me. Not the brush where it had gone. The other brush, north of me. The thing had gone east, and it had come back from the north, around in a half circle. In the time I'd been sitting in the blind, talking to myself about whether to leave the rifle. While I had been deciding, it had been moving. I was between the thing and the goat. I'm going to slow this down. I want you to see it. The spotlight from the blind was hitting the cleared yard in a cone. I was in the cone, 20 feet from the blind, with Peppa half in my arms. The brush to the east, where the thing had walked into, was dark beyond the edge of the cone. The brush to the north, where the breath had come from, was also dark, but closer, maybe 15 feet from where I was crouched. The pen with the rest of the goats was behind me to the west. The rifle was in the blind to the west and north of me, 15 feet away through the burlap wall. The thing came out of the north brush, walking, upright on the hind legs, the way Ramiro's photograph had shown, 4 feet tall, gray. Hairless skin, the ridge on the back of its neck standing up so I could see what looked like a row of short spines or stiff hairs. Dark, the length of my finger, long arms hanging at its sides, the fingers on the hands curling and uncurling slowly. Its head was tilted, like a dog's head when a dog is interested in something. It walked into the cone of the spotlight and stopped about 12 feet from me. I let go of Peppa. I stood up slowly. I had my hands at my sides. I was looking at the thing, and the thing was looking at me, and there was about 12 feet of packed sand between us, and the dead goat was at my feet, between us, and the thing was on one side, and the brush was at its back, and I was on the other side, and the pen was at my back, and we were holding that position like 2 men in a fight who haven't started the fight yet. I was between the Chupacabra and its kill. I'll use the word now. I've been holding it off for the whole telling, and I'm going to stop holding it off because there isn't another word that has the right shape for what I am describing. I don't love the word. The word has been used so many times by so many people on so many TV shows that it doesn't mean anything anymore. The same way the word vampire has been used so many times that it doesn't mean anything when somebody actually feels watched in their own house. There were older words for these things before that word came in. Words my great-great-grandmother's people would have used. Words my mother's grandmother knew and didn't pass down because she didn't want to scare her kids. I do not have those words. I am using the one I have. The thing breathed. I could hear it breathing. The breath was wet. There was a rattle in the throat, deep, like it had something in there, fluid or tissue or just the way it was made. The smell was on me, the ammonia and the sweet rot. It was so close I could feel the difference between the air around the thing and the air around me. The thing's air was warmer, or wetter, something. The animal had its own atmosphere, and I had stepped into it. I could see things up close I hadn't been able to see through the scope. The skin wasn't smooth gray, the way it had looked from 20 feet. Up close it had a pattern of darker patches, almost like a giraffe's pattern, but blotchier, smaller, the patches running together at the edges. The skin was thick. It had folds at the joints, at the elbows and the knees, deep folds that looked like callus, the kind you see on a working dog that has slept on concrete its whole life. There were scars on the chest, white lines old, the kind you see on a fighting dog that has lived through things. I saw one across the rib cage that ran maybe 8 inches diagonally. The ridge along the spine was hair. I could see that up close, coarse hair, like a pig's bristle, the length of my finger, standing up. I don't know if it was always standing up or if it was standing because the thing was alert. There were ticks on it, ticks the size of dimes, swollen, hanging off the loose skin under the throat. Whatever it was, it had parasites. That detail, more than anything else, is what I keep coming back to. The thing had ticks. Mosquitoes were on its back. A real animal in a real piece of country, with the same bugs that bite me biting it. That part of it was familiar. That was the part I could not get my head around. The smell wasn't only ammonia close up. There was something fermented under it, like a wine that has gone bad. There was wet hair, even though most of it was hairless. There was iron like blood. The breath had its own smell, separate from the body. A hot, fishy smell, the way a cat's mouth smells if you've ever had a cat breathe in your face. The breath came out in slow, regular pulls. It was not panting. It was not the breath of an animal that had been running. It was the breath of a thing that was at rest, that had walked here at its own pace, that was not in any kind of hurry. It opened its mouth. The teeth were exactly what the photograph had shown, and they were exactly what I had not wanted to see up close. The canines on top were 2.5 inches, maybe more. They came down past the bottom jaw. Behind them were rows of smaller teeth, sharp, packed in tight. The tongue was dark, almost purple, and it moved over the teeth in the way a snake's tongue does, checking the air. I said something. I don't know what I said. I said something out loud, in the dark, to the thing, in the spotlight, with my mom's dead goat at my feet. I've tried to remember and I can't. It might have been a prayer. It might have been my dad's name. It might have been my own name. I don't know. I said something. The thing tilted its head further. The angle was almost cute. The angle was the kind of angle a person would put a thing in if they were trying to make it cute on purpose. A small, careful tilt, like it was hearing me and processing me, the way a dog tilts its head at a high-pitched noise. Then it took a step toward me. One step. The leg came forward. The joint bent backward at the digitigrade hinge. The foot came down on the packed sand in front of the goat. Its toes spread when the weight came down. The claws sank an inch into the sand. The thing's head dropped lower as it took the step, the shoulders coming forward, the body shifting from standing to a half crouch, the long arms swinging slightly with the motion. The mouth was still open. The breath was still rattling. I have asked myself for 7 years what I should have done in that moment. I was 12 feet from a thing that was getting ready to close on me. I had no weapon. The rifle was in the blind. The knife was on my belt, but the knife was a 4-inch fixed blade, and I had never used it on anything bigger than a deer that had already been killed by a bullet. The flashlight in my back pocket would have done nothing. I was a 50-year-old man with bad knees who had played football in high school in 1989 and not run in earnest in 20 years. What I did was nothing. I didn't move. I didn't take a step back. I didn't raise my hands. I didn't yell. I didn't try to scare it. I stood there with my hands at my sides and I looked at it. And I let it look at me. And I did not move. I want to tell you why. Or I want to tell you what I think it was, because I'm not sure I know why even now. Part of me thinks I froze the way prey freezes, the same way Mom's goats had frozen against the west fence when the thing was at the east fence. Part of me thinks I had decided, somewhere underneath the part of my brain that makes decisions, that if I moved, I'd be acting like prey, and the thing would treat me like prey. I had to be the other thing. I had to not be food. I had to not flinch. So I didn't, and the thing stopped. After the one step, it stopped. It looked at me. It tilted its head the other way. Its tongue went back into its mouth. Its mouth closed. The teeth disappeared behind the gray lips. The breath quieted. We stood there. I don't know how long. A long time. The spotlight on. The goat between us. The brush around us. The goats in the pen behind me quiet. My mother asleep in the house, 70 yards behind the pen. Then the thing reached down. Not at me. At the goat. It put one of those 4-fingered hands on Peppa's shoulder, the way it had done the first time. Possessive. The way a man puts his hand on something that's his. It looked at me again. I think now, I am not sure, but I think now that it was saying something. It was saying, "This is mine." It was correcting an arrangement that I had made in my head and that it had not agreed to. I had thought the goat was mine, because the goat had been mine in the pen. The thing had taken the goat over the fence and out of the pen and into the cleared yard, and from the thing's point of view, that was the negotiation. That was the line moved. The goat was on the thing's side of the fence now, even though the fence wasn't a fence anymore, and I had walked over to the thing's side and tried to take it back. It picked the goat up, slowly, with one hand. The other hand stayed where I could see it. It lifted Peppa off the ground until she was hanging from its hand by the neck, and then it backed away, 3 steps backward, not turning, watching me, then 4 steps. Then it was at the edge of the cone of the spotlight. Then it turned, smooth, and it walked into the brush on the north side, with the goat hanging from its hand and dragging slightly behind it, and the brush closed behind it. and the smell faded out of the air, and the sound of its walking faded. And then I was alone in the cleared yard with the empty light on me. I stood there for a long time. I don't know how long. I started shaking. The shaking started in my knees and went up. I had to sit down in the sand because my legs went. I sat in the sand in the spotlight with my hands on my knees, and I shook. 20 minutes, an hour. The sky started getting gray at the edges. A caracara started calling from the windbreak. The screech owl did not start back up that morning. It never did. The owl was gone after that night, and I never heard it again. When I got up, I went back to the blind and I got the rifle, and I walked back to the house. My mom was at the screen door when I got there. She had heard nothing. She had been asleep. She looked at my face and she said, "Mijo, come inside. Come inside." I went inside. I sat at the kitchen table. She poured me coffee. She poured herself coffee. She sat across from me. She didn't ask me what had happened. She waited. She had always known how to wait. After a long time, I said, "I saw it." She nodded. I said, "I couldn't shoot it. I had it in the scope and I couldn't shoot it." She said, "I know, mijo." I said, "It took Peppa." She closed her eyes for a second. Then she opened them and she said, "Peppa was a goat. Peppa is a goat. I have other goats. We will lock them in the chicken coop tomorrow, and we will not let them out at night again. The thing will go away." I said, "I don't think it's going to go away." She said, "Then we'll see." I went back out at full light. The spotlight bulb had finally given up around 6, and the cleared yard was just yard again, sand and a patch of dead bahia grass, and the line of the brush. There was blood where Peppa had been, a dark patch about the size of a dinner plate, soaking down through the sand. There were tracks, the same 4-toe prints I'd photographed the morning after the first kill, only now I had a stride to measure. I paced it out. From where the thing had walked into the cone of light to where it had stood through the standoff, the stride was about 4 feet between prints. Long, longer than mine, and I'm 6 feet. The prints were deep on the toes and shallow on the heel, which is what you'd expect for something that puts its weight on the front of the foot, on the digitigrade joint. There was nothing wrong with the prints themselves. They looked like prints. It was the spacing that was wrong. A coyote with a stride that long does not exist. I walked the line of the prints into the brush. I followed them maybe 10 yards. Then they stopped. Not faded out. Not joined a game trail. The last clean print was on a patch of soft sand at the edge of a mesquite, and after that, nothing. As if the thing had stepped out of the world. I stood there in the brush, the sun starting to get heat in it, with Peppa's blood under the sand behind me, and I knew I was not going to find a trail. I knew the thing had not gone the way the prints had pointed. I came back out to the cleared yard. I walked the perimeter of where I had stood. I picked up a few stiff black hairs from the ground where the thing had been, and I put them in a Ziploc bag, and I sealed it, and I have it still in a coffee can on a shelf in the well house. I have never had them tested. I don't know who you'd take them to. I don't know what I'd ask the answer to be. I just have them. The thing didn't come back to the pen. I want to put that down because it's true. Once I'd moved the remaining 11 goats into the chicken coop with the cement floor and the metal roof, the way Mom had told me to do weeks before, the thing didn't come for them again. There were a few more nights where I sat up and watched, and a few nights where the motion lights came on for nothing, and one night where I smelled it on the wind from the brush north of the house, and I felt watched for a long time before the feeling went away. But the kills stopped. At our place. Ramiro lost 3 more goats and a calf over the next month. He shifted his cattle out of the brushy pasture and into the trap pasture by the house. He locked up his goats. After about 6 weeks of him doing that, the kills stopped at his place too. He thought the animal had moved on. He thought it was somewhere else, hunting on somebody else's place, doing the same thing on somebody else's land. I never told Ramiro what had happened in the cleared yard. I never told anybody, until now. I have not told anybody this story in full. My mom knew the outline. My sister doesn't. My ex-wife, who I've been divorced from since 14 and who I'm friendly with, doesn't know. Nobody knows. I tried to write it down a few times, and I'd get to the part where I left the rifle in the blind, and I'd stop, because I didn't know how to write it in a way that didn't make me look like a fool, and I didn't know how to write it in a way that explained why I'd done it. Now I'm older. I am 53. My mom passed in November of 2021, 3 years after that summer, of cancer. She'd had it for a while before she told us. My sister and I were with her at the end. The last conversation we had where she was really there, where the morphine wasn't on her. She said something I want to put down in this telling because it's the closest thing I have to an ending. She said, "Mijo, the animal, did it ever come back?" I told her no. The animal had never come back to our land that I knew of. She said, "I know it didn't. I know because I never smelled it again. I used to smell it sometimes when I was outside in the evening after that night. I never told you. I would smell it and I would go back inside. After about a year, I stopped smelling it. It went somewhere else. That's what they do, mijo. They go somewhere else when they decide to. Nobody pushes them. They just decide." She said, "Do you know why it left you alone that night in the yard?" I told her I didn't. She said, "Because you saw it. Some of these things, mijo, they just want to be seen. Then they go." That is what my mother said to me 3 days before she died. I don't know if she was right. I have thought about it for years. It's not a thing I would have said on my own. But it has the shape of something true. The way the things old women say sometimes have the shape of something true that you can't quite verify and can't quite shake. I sold most of the land in 2023. I couldn't keep it up by myself, and my sister didn't want it, and I didn't want to be the last one on it. I kept 20 acres around the house. The rest went to a hunting outfitter who's running it as a high-fence whitetail spread, which I have feelings about, but it's not relevant. I live in the house alone. The chicken coop is still standing. The goat pen is gone, taken down for the wire. The blind I'd built was burned about 2 weeks after that night because I didn't want it on the property. Mom helped me burn it. She didn't ask why. She just helped. I want to talk about what I think the animal was. I don't know. I want to put that first. I do not know. I'm not going to give you a clean answer because I don't have one. What I can tell you is what I've ruled out and what I have not been able to rule out. Ruled out a healthy coyote, a mangy coyote, a dog, a coyote-dog hybrid, a feral pig, a bobcat, a mountain lion, a black bear out of range, a hyena that escaped a zoo, which is a real theory people have floated about Texas chupacabras, and which is genuinely funny, but is not supported by any evidence I have ever seen. A person in a costume. A person of any kind. A jackal. A wolf. A wolverine, which doesn't even live in Texas. I have ruled these out for these reasons. The track was wrong for all of them. The size was wrong for some. The jump over the fence was beyond what most of them could do. The behavior was wrong. In particular, the behavior of leaving the kills bloodless and uneaten, which is not what hungry mammalian predators do, and the behavior of moving the kill outside the fence to make a point at me, which is not what any animal I have ever read about does. The eyes were wrong. The teeth were wrong. The structure of the legs was wrong, with the digitigrade hind limbs that took weight on the rear pad, which is mammalian, but stood upright like a person, which mammals don't do for long. Not ruled out that it was a mammal of some kind that nobody has cataloged. This is the position that a real biologist would take. If I could ever get one to look at the evidence, which I can't, because the only physical evidence I have is a phone photo of a footprint and Ramiro's trail camera photo, which Ramiro will not release. The biological community at Texas A&M Kingsville, which is the closest university to me, and where I have a cousin who teaches in the kinesiology department, would tell me that any unknown mammal in South Texas is so vanishingly unlikely that the more probable explanation is some combination of mange, infection, hybridization, and bad lighting. I have thought about this position carefully. I have tried to make it work. It cannot account for the photograph and the behavior and the eyes and the teeth and the way it moved when I had the rifle on it. It can account for some of the kills. It cannot account for the encounter. Not ruled out that it was something else. I do not know what. I have heard the word chupacabra used for 40 years. I do not love the word. What I have, in place of the word, is a description of an animal that does not match anything in any field guide I can find, and that looked into my eyes with intelligence behind its eyes, and decided to walk away from me when it didn't have to. I think it didn't have to. That is the part I keep coming back to. It could have killed me. I was 12 feet from it, no weapon. It was holding a goat that weighed almost as much as it did, with one hand, and not slowing down. It had teeth that would have gone through my neck before I could get my arm up. It could have killed me and gone back to the brush, and nobody would have known anything until my mom found me in the morning. It didn't. I think it wanted me to know. I think the whole second half of that encounter was the thing telling me something. And I think the thing it was telling me was that it knew the difference between the goat and me. And it had taken the goat because the goat was what it wanted, and it had not taken me because I was not what it wanted, and it had wanted me to see that. I think it was correcting my idea of what it was. I had been treating it like a coyote that I could shoot from a blind, like a problem with a solution. It had walked into the spotlight to show me that it wasn't that. I don't know what it was. I want to say that one more time. I don't know. I want to tell you about a couple of things that happened in the years after, because if I just leave the story at the night and the kitchen table, it makes the experience sound cleaner than it was. The experience didn't end that night. It bled out for a long time. The first thing was sleep. I didn't sleep through the night for about 8 months. I'd get to sleep around 11, and I'd be up at 2:10 a.m. And the time the owl had stopped, on the nose, every night, with my heart going. I'd lie there and listen. The owl was gone, but other owls were around, and the cicadas, and the wind in the mesquite, and I'd lie there and listen to the brush and try to hear if anything was wrong. Mom heard me get up. She'd hear my feet on the floorboards in the next room, and she'd come out and we'd sit at the kitchen table and have a glass of milk like I was a kid, and after a while, one of us would go back to bed. This happened maybe 4 nights a week through the winter and into the spring. The second thing was the dogs. Cappy and Pepito had been inside dogs since 2018. Cappy died in late 2019 of just being old. Pepito died in 2020 of the same. After Pepito died, Mom didn't want another dog. She said the dogs we'd had been spooked too long, and she didn't want to do that to another animal. We didn't get another dog. There hasn't been a dog on this place since 2020, and I noticed that because there's always been a dog on this place. The yard feels different without one. Quieter. More open in a way that isn't good. The third thing was the brush. I stopped going into it. Not all the way. I still walked the fences. I still drove the senderos when I had to check a tank or a windmill, but I didn't go off the senderos anymore. I didn't push into the thick stuff to track a wounded deer. If I shot a deer in the season after, and it ran into the heavy brush, I let it go. I lost 2 deer that way. One of them, an 8-point, my dad would have killed me for letting walk. I told Mom I'd lost them. She didn't push it. The fourth thing was the dreams. I had one dream that came back over and over. It came back maybe twice a month for the first year, and then less often, and now I get it maybe twice a year. In the dream, I am in the cleared yard, in the spotlight, and the thing is in front of me. The setup is the same as that night. But in the dream, I look down, and Peppa isn't between us. The dead thing between us is me. I am dead at my own feet, with 2 punctures in my neck. And the version of me that is standing up is looking at the version of me on the ground, and the thing is looking at both of us. And I understand in the dream that the thing took me, that night, and the version of me that walked back to the house and told my mom and burned the blind and lived for another 7 years was the wrong version, the version it had let go because it wanted somebody to tell, and the real me had been taken into the brush and was somewhere out there still. I always wake up from the dream the same way. I sit up and I check my neck for punctures and I drink water. After about 30 seconds, I'm okay, and I go back to sleep. I don't know what to do with that dream. I'm not telling you it means anything. I'm telling you about it because it's part of what happened. The experience doesn't end the night the thing walks back into the brush. The experience keeps going. It's still going. It will keep going until I die. I want to come back to one thing my mother said. She said the thing left because it had been seen. I have turned that over and turned it over. I think there is something in it, but I think it's not the whole truth. I think it is also true that the thing left because it had let me go, and it didn't want to be in a place where it had let somebody go, because that wasn't a habit it wanted to get into. I think it had broken a rule that night in the yard. Whatever rules a thing like that has, and I don't know if it has rules or just patterns, it had broken one. The rule was that you don't get between a thing and its kill, and walk away. It had let me walk away. It had moved on after that, the way a man moves on after he has done something he doesn't want anybody to see him do again. I am guessing. I am completely guessing. I am putting my words into the mouth of an animal, or something that isn't an animal, and I have no business doing it. But somebody is going to ask me what I think, or I am imagining somebody is going to ask me, and what I think is that. A last thing. I drove down to Falfurrias last week to pick up some feed at the co-op. On the way back, I came past the Don Pedrito Jaramillo shrine on Heritage Road, which I hadn't been to in years. I pulled in. I parked. I went in. The shrine is small, white stucco walls, candles burning, photographs and notes on the walls from people who'd come for healing, some of them dating back 50 years. Old people leave their grandkids' photos. People with cancer leave hospital wristbands. There are crutches hanging on the walls from people who had said they didn't need them anymore. I'd never come here for any of that. I came because I was passing. I lit a candle. I stood for a long time. I am a lapsed Catholic, the way most of the men I know are lapsed Catholics, and I don't have a clean theology to put on what I do at a shrine. But I stood there and I thought about my mom, who is buried in the cemetery on the other side of town next to my dad. And I thought about the thing in the brush, and I thought about the night in the cleared yard. I lit a candle. I left a note. I don't know if it's still there. I wrote it on the back of a receipt from the feed store, in pen, in 3 lines, for the thing that did not take me. I have not told. Let it stay that way. Then I drove home. I am breaking the 3rd line now by telling you this. I have told. I am letting it stop being that way. I don't know what changes, exactly, if anything. I don't know if the thing is still out there. I don't know if it cares whether I talk. I don't know if it is bound by what a man writes on a receipt at a shrine, or whether the shrine matters, or whether any of this matters at all. I am a 53-year-old man on a porch in Brooks County, with too many years of not saying it sitting in my chest, and I'm letting it out. If you live in the brush country and you start losing animals in a way that doesn't add up, and you start smelling something on the wind that isn't on the wind any other night, and you hear the clicks from different parts of the dark at the same time, and the birds in your yard go quiet for no reason, sit on your porch for a few nights, and don't try to be a hero. Don't bring the rifle out. The rifle is for coyotes. This isn't a coyote. Sit on your porch with the lights on and let the thing know you see it. Then go inside. Lock the doors. Wait. It will go. I had to learn that the hard way. I learned it standing in a spotlight in my own pasture with my hands at my sides, no weapon, a thing with orange eyes looking at me from 12 feet, while my own mother slept inside the house behind me, while my dog snored on the porch, while the coffee in the thermos went cold. I learned it from a thing that could have killed me and didn't, because I had stepped between it and its kill and I had not flinched, and that wasn't an answer to anything. That was a thing that bought me a few seconds, and the only reason I am alive to write this is that the thing in the cone of light decided, for reasons it had, and that I do not understand, that it had made its point, and that I could keep walking around above ground. I still smell the brush at night sometimes. Not the ammonia, just the regular smell, mesquite and sand and the faint sour smell that a dry stock tank gets when it's been low for a while. I sit on the porch with a cup of coffee, the same way my mother used to do, and I look out at the country, and I think about the years before that summer, when I knew what was in the brush, when I could name every track in the sand around the water trough, when the whole place felt like an extension of my own body. It doesn't feel like that anymore. I don't know what's in the brush. I have not known since 2018. Some nights it doesn't matter, and the country is what the country is. The same country my great-grandfather staked off and my dad worked and my mom died on. Other nights I look at the edge of the cleared yard where the spotlight used to throw a hard line between the grass and the brush, and I feel that line in my chest, my line between what is mine and what is not, and I understand that the line was always there and the thing in the brush had been on the other side of it the whole time, the whole 43 years I'd been here, and I had just never had a reason to think about it. Now I think about it. That is the thing that didn't go away. When the animal went away, the thinking didn't go. That is the story. That is what happened. There was a kid goat at my feet, opened up at the neck, and the thing that had done it was 20 feet behind me with the brush at its back and the spotlight in its eyes. and I had walked out into the cleared yard with no rifle and put myself between them, and I am alive only because something about that night was not the night the thing was going to take a person, and I have spent every day since then knowing that the next night might have been, and the night after that, and the one after that, and that the thing is somewhere now, and somebody else is going to be the one in the spotlight, and I hope when it happens they have the sense not to do what I did, and I hope the thing has the same mood it had with me, and I hope they get to walk home. That's all I have. Thank you for listening.